Greetings all, Ferrari-Man601 here. Continuing with my model steam engine hobby, I'd like to show you my new Wilesco D455 stationary steam engine. I just got this one in the mail yesterday. It's my second Wilesco engine. Those of you who have seen my video on my D20, you'll be familiar with that. And I liked that engine so much that I decided to purchase another one. And I wanted something a little bit different, so I decided to go for a D455. It's the first engine I've had that's been arranged vertically with a vertical boiler and vertical cylinder. However, its operation is more or less the same as the D20 and other double-acting single-cylinder engines that are out there, made by other manufacturers as well as other Wilescos. It's a little bit of a unique piece though, simply because it does have that vertical arrangement, so it's a little bit different in terms of the angles and such that you have to operate things from, but for the most part it is still a double-acting steam engine. Quick overview of what you get on the outside, and then we'll talk about the capabilities of the thing a little bit more. See your setup, it's actually rather compact. I would say the base is about 7-8 inches long by about 4 to 5 inches wide, so it's rectangular, but it does not have a very wide footprint at all, certainly a whole lot more compact than the D20. And of course, because everything is arranged vertically, it expands in an upward direction versus a horizontal one, so smaller footprint, more compact. That also means, though, that you have to be a little bit more careful when operating these things, as we'll go into, because your controls are fairly close to all of the very hot parts on the engine, and we'll go into detail a little bit later as to what they are. But you've got your boiler here. It looks to be about the same size as the boiler on the D20, but it's arranged rather differently. First of all, it's obviously vertical, but you also have a flue that runs through the boiler from the firebox all the way up to the top, and you can see the stack on top that actually exhausts the fire. This is not a steam exhaust, this is fire exhaust. The top of the stack is removable here, and you can go down and see inside the flue. There's not very good lighting down there, but that goes all the way down through the boiler. It looks to be a brass tube, and that actually heats the water a whole lot more efficiently than simply having a fire on the bottom here in the firebox and just waiting for convection to catch up with everything and get that water nice and hot. And we'll show that in operation a little bit later. We'll leave the stack off here so it's just a little bit easier for you to see everything else. But up here we've got our safety valve. It's a typical poppet valve that you get on most Wilesco engines, and also very similar to the Jensen safety valves. And you've got your whistle up top here. Different from the whistle on the D20, at least the D20 that I have. It doesn't have a pull chain. It's got this little handle here, and it just tilts every which way. The valves on this engine, the ones that you operate, are actually rather very loose. So they do sort of bind up when things come up to temperature and pressure, but at the moment you've just barely got to flick it with your finger to send it tilting all sorts of directions. So this is whistle closed, and this is whistle full open up to vertical. So that's wonderful. Moving to the other side of the boiler, we now have our cylinder. So we have obviously our steam pipe coming up the top of the boiler, running to our steam regulator valve, which is right here, which then goes into the cylinder, into this entrance here, into the steam chest where our slide valve is, and then that sends the steam into the cylinder where it will actuate the piston. So double acting cylinder as on the D20, so you get a power stroke down and a power stroke up as the valve ports are closed and opened by that slide valve. So the action of the engine, you see the main piston and connecting rod going up and down, and you also see that secondary action of the con rod for the valve gear going up and down, run off of the crankshaft via an eccentric linkage, just as it is on the D20. So essentially the same action, essentially the same engine for the most part as the D20. I believe this cylinder is a little smaller than the one on the D20, however. Also, as you have on the D20, you've got your oiler. Very small. It's much smaller than the one on the D20. I'd say maybe half the size, but it's a screw cap, threaded screw there, as you can see. And then you've got the oiler, which you would fill up with steam oil before running the engine. And we'll do that once we fire the thing up. Crankshaft here, running to your flywheel. Obviously you see the action. And you've got two power takeoffs on the other side of the flywheel. Two grooved pulleys, a larger one and a smaller one for driving accessories. So that's your basic overview of the engine. This condensed water catch, same sort of tray that you get on the D20 and several other Wilesco models. It just catches condensed water from the cylinder after it has gone through and done work. So this is the exhaust pipe there, and it just empties directly into this condensed water catch. At high RPM, water flies all over the place when you run this thing. So I don't like to run these engines very fast anyway, so that's just more incentive not to do so. They can rev out pretty high, I must say, but you run into lubrication issues because there's not a whole lot of oil that's carried in that oiler, so you'll run out of oil pretty quickly at high RPM, and you don't want to do any damage to your cylinder walls or piston, anything like that. So discretion is the better part of valor with these engines for sure. Plus, they're designed basically to be run at prototypical speeds anyway. You can rev them out, like I said, but it's really not ideal. So we'll get ready to fire the thing up now, and we'll show you the filling procedure and all of that good stuff. Okay, so to fill the boiler, first we remove our safety valve, and then we insert our filler funnel into the port where the safety valve is fitted. Next we pour in our distilled water. I'm using an old isopropyl alcohol bottle just for ease of pouring, but it's distilled water in there. And then you just fill it up very slowly. The funnel is very small, it's got a very narrow neck on it, so it takes a while to fill this thing up, but it does fill eventually. And then we'll show you how we check the level on the sight glass. Big sight glass on this boiler, runs a little bit more than half the length of the boiler itself, so it's gives you a pretty good indicator of the rate at which you're going through water. So it's a handy feature for sure. This is just about as exciting as watching paint dry, so we will be back once we are ready to check the water level. Okay, so we've got our water level up to a reasonable point. I'm not quite sure you're going to be able to see the level there, but using my phone's flashlight here, maybe you can see it. Right where the light is at its brightest is roughly the level of the water, so roughly this point. I know I'm being backlit right now, so it's not particularly helpful, but it's about where my thumb is, which is a safe level. And you never want to run low on water because you'll risk scorching the boiler and perhaps even melting the solder there. So we affix the safety valve, just sufficient to hand tighten that. And then we can reinstall our chimney. Just sits on there, it doesn't screw down or anything, so it's just there. Note on the chimney, it is brass. It looks like it may have been copper plated, it's hard to tell. But this does get mighty hot. So you can see it has already started to tarnish a little bit. And I say it might be copper plated because I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it on the video, but I notice in some places where it has already started to oxidize, there's a greenish tint, so it tells me that there might be some copper mixed in with this alloy. But that's that. So the next thing we do before building up our fire, you don't necessarily have to do it in this order, is we just want to hit our oiling points and make sure that everything is going to be operable. Once we get everything fired up and coming up to temperature and pressure. So because we're running vertically, gravity is not going to be our friend during this process. So what we'll do is first we'll fill up the oiler cup, and again, there is no need to do this in any particular order, provided that you do it. So we'll fill our oiler cup and we'll cycle the engine a couple of times to draw that oil through. So that's fine. Next thing we need to do is hit our mechanical points. Unlike on the D20, there are no drilled out areas where oil can just sit, so you've got to just put it on the joints and hope for the best. Again, gravity's working against you. So you want to hit the joint on the valve gear, so where the con rod connects to the slide valve. You want to hit the knuckle here on the con rod from the piston, and of course you want to hit the crankshaft. So you want to hit the rod pin on the crank from the piston, and you want to hit the rod pin on the crank from the eccentric. So you'll do all of that. You don't need a lot, and like I said, gravity is working against you, so oil is just going to flow where it pleases, more or less. That's a bad angle. And our rod pin. Just enough, you don't need a lot. You can also hit the top of the slide valve up here if you want, not necessary, and most of the oil is just going to get blown out when the engine starts anyway, but you can hit it. When the engine comes up to temperature, obviously the metals expand a little bit and the oil will actually start to slide down in there, but because you've put oil in the oiler cup, that's going to be lubricated anyway, at least to some extent. I'm not entirely sure for how long oil remains in that cup when the engine's in operation, because it just is barely a dollop. Cycling the engine around there. See, the oil level in that cup hasn't really dropped, so I'm guessing we're full somewhere. So we screw that back on, and it's very small, so it can be a little tricky to get it seated correctly, because of course you don't want to cross thread. Now we've secured all of our fittings and we've oiled where we need to oil. Next job is to fill the burner tray. I've chosen not to line this one with aluminum foil like I have on my D20, only because the firebox on this is a little bit smaller and it's not quite as well ventilated, so I'm thinking about airflow, because when you line it with aluminum you cover up those holes on the sides of the tray and you do smother the fire a little bit. So I'm using sterno as fuel, and I'm using this little syringe just to inject it into the tray. I am right-handed and I'm holding the camera with my right hand right now, so this might be a little interesting. But you see the sterno goes in, like so, trying to layer it a little bit. And you've got a little bit more clearance on the firebox door on the D455 than you do on the D20, so you can pile it up a little bit higher if you so desire, and you won't get as much residue from hitting the top of the firebox. So the tray goes in to the firebox like this. It engages with a little track, and we'll stop right there so we have enough room to get a lighter in there and light the thing. Alright, so we're set to light our fuel. And there we go. Slide it back into the box. And now we just wait for pressure to start to build. I'm going to close your regulator when you're firing the boiler for the first time, because things are going to expand and you want to start to have pressure build up as soon as possible. You'll notice that there is no gauge on this boiler. You can modify the engine obviously to put a gauge on there if you like, but there is no gauge that comes standard with this engine, unlike the D20. But we can look inside the firebox and we see we have got a fire well established now. And obviously that is exhausting up through the stack, which is already mighty hot. So now it's a question of just waiting for heat and pressure to start to build, and then we'll be ready to run. Okay, so at this point we're starting to come up to what I'd call a soft boil. Starting to get some hissing and squealing now. And you can see some bubbles in there as the temperature continues to rise. That metal you can see in the backdrop of our sight glass, that's the flue that runs through the boiler, and that's obviously connected to the stack. I'm starting to hear some hissing now. I've had the whistle open because I have no gauge, so I can't judge visually what the temperature is, so we use that hissing through the whistle to judge what we're doing. So now I'm going to close the whistle without burning myself on the stack, which is mighty hot. So the whistle is now closed, and we're now going to allow pressure to begin building in the boiler. So yeah, you can see everything just starting to come up to the boiling territory. I would say that we're almost there. Yeah, very, very close now. And we're just about ready to turn this thing over. All right, so we are now up to a full boil, so you can see there. And we're going to open our regulator and start getting the thing ticking over. The valve is a bit tighter now that everything is up to temperature. So it's not quite as easy to move, but it's still rather, shall we say, loose. So now we're just going to purge some of the condensed water. Here at working that water through. Just about ready to go. And I think we've got it. That's a running D455. And as the cylinder continues to come up to temperature, it will increase revs without me having to adjust the throttle much. But I really don't like to run it much faster than this to begin with. It's throwing some oil into the boiler there. Can't really avoid that because of where the boiler is in relation to the crank. Slow it down a little bit. But I have to say the operation is smooth. It's not very loud. And there's not much vibration. Another smooth German engine for you. Of course, the engine is reversible because it is double acting. And there it is, just running very, very nicely. And you can see here just running at a low RPM like this. This is more of a prototypical speed for the engine. I don't tend to like to run them very fast. Obviously low RPM will extend the life of all of your components significantly, but it also is just a whole lot nicer to watch all of the little details in operation at low speeds because everything just turns into a blur at higher speeds. But you can see just how slowly and steadily it will run even at a very light throttle opening. The flywheel merrily spinning away over there. Condensed water catch is doing its job. And everything is just copacetic, as we might say. Over here on the boiler side, the watch glass, everything is just bubbling away nicely. The whistle on these engines sounds just like the whistle on any other Wilesco or even Jensen's for that matter. Give it a little bit more revs. And it's actually quite difficult to operate the whistle when everything is running because it exhausts right onto your fingers. So it's hot. Very, very hot. I've already burned myself a couple of times operating this engine. But you see the theory. Nothing too special. It's cumbersome to operate. But there you go. And it'll just chug away nicely. Just wanted to give you a good chance to hear it run. It's quite nice to listen to. And although I have told you that I do not really enjoy at all revving these engines too much, I do just want to show you what sort of RPM they can achieve if you are so inclined, although again I do not recommend it simply because it just puts a whole lot of strain on your components and it's not really necessary. We'll just get it all happy and running now, and then we'll rev it up. So that's full throttle right there. Again, I do not like to rev them that high. Only did it for a short time, so it's okay, but that's what they can do if you're into that kind of thing. You can see it flung a whole bunch of oil on the boiler and that kind of thing. So high RPM, not this thing's friend, but it is capable of it if you so desire. Again though, I just like to have them at prototypical speeds like this, just happily ticking over, minding its own business. Alright, so when you're ready to stop running and put the thing away, the put away is a little bit more involved than the D20 because this boiler doesn't have a drain valve or anything like that, so it's a little bit more hands-on because you physically got to tip the thing over and drain it to wherever you want to drain it. I'm going to be catching the boiler water and putting it back in to my distilled water reservoir so I can save on some of that, but you'll be draining it as you wish. Obviously you'll have to extinguish the fire, empty the condensed water catch, and all of that good stuff. But first you'll have to stop the engine and then dump pressure from the boiler once you extinguish your fire, which if it's not already extinguished by itself, which it well may be, no it's not, it's still burning a little bit. And now it is not. Burner slide does not get that hot, so you can just put it down when you take it out. Then the next thing to do will be to drain, well not drain your boiler, but dump the pressure from your boiler. So that involves opening up the whistle and letting it scream for a bit. It takes a while on this engine. But that's it. Fully open. And pressure will obviously vent that way. You do not want to try to remove the safety valve when it's under pressure because, well, you're probably going to get burned. Speaking of getting burned, you'll want to take the stack off before you tilt the engine over. So you'll take that off with appropriate heat protection, of course, because that is still ridiculously hot. And obviously the whistle will be ear splitting until pressure dumps sufficiently from the boiler. There we go, that's starting to drop now. Right, so pressure is mostly gone. And then you'd be clear to take off your safety valve and then empty your boiler in your manner of choosing. I'm not going to show you the put away simply because it is more hands-on and I only have 2 hands, so I don't have anybody else to hold the camera for me, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I hope that this was informative. Little bit of a haphazard look at a Wilesco D455. I hope it was a little bit more in-depth than some of the other videos on YouTube that are a little bit more general, but nonetheless, it's a good engine. I don't recommend it as a first engine if you are looking to get into this hobby because it is a little bit more involved to operate. It's not quite as polished as something like, say, a D20, but if you do know how to operate model steam engines, you will enjoy this quite a lot. So until next time, Ferrari-Man601 saying thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for a slow motion shot of the engine in operation at 240 frames per second. So thank you very much.